In a podcast episode of mine from a while ago, I was talking about how I often tend to criticize social media and what it brings to the table. But there are also some aspects of it that I really enjoy. For example, on Instagram, I could watch those funny comedy reels forever. I think some of those are just so hilarious and so creative. And I keep sending my friends and my family way too many videos. I think they're all annoyed at this point. And so I have to get that under control. But then also, another aspect that I also really enjoy are these simple reminders or quotes or pieces of advice that I see. And sometimes they are backed up with cute little drawings or artwork. And the thing is, those are often so simple, but at the same time, just so good. Because yes, sometimes I think it's valuable to dive deep into topics and learn things that we never knew before and never heard before. But I think other times it's so valuable to just be reminded of the simple stuff that just never gets old in a way, but we also often seem to forget those. And so today, similar to that other episode of mine, I wanted to share some of these simple reminders that I think are just so valuable and so important. And so I guess some pieces of advice that you didn't ask for, but maybe you need to hear. Also, if you do enjoy my content, please feel free to like the video, comment down below, and make sure that you are subscribed if you aren't already. Your continued support really helps for me to continue to create these episodes. So yeah, thank you so much. Life is too short to let loneliness drive you back to toxic people. There are a lot of different reasons as to why we go back to environments that are actually not good for us. But I think a very common one is the fear of loneliness. When we are so afraid of being alone, and that fear is so big that we would rather stay in an environment or with people that are harmful to us than face that fear, which is crazy when you really think about it, but also so common. And I think the only way to move out of that is to face the loneliness head on, until eventually we become so comfortable with ourselves and our own loneliness in a way that from there, anyone we choose to interact with or spend time with, it's because those people are bringing joy and happiness into our lives, and not because they are saving us from ourselves at the expense of our own happiness and sanity. For a long time in my life, I think I was still very much accepting behaviors that were really harmful to me for a couple of different reasons, but one of them definitely being the fear of being alone, because I somehow thought that if I would stand up for myself more or walk away or something would happen, that I would just end up being completely by myself, and that thought was scary. And so even though it was never something that I was consciously aware of in those moments, now looking back, that fear was definitely making me stay and accept in moments where that choice was really not good for me. Then eventually I went through a phase where I feel life kind of pushed me to stand up for myself more and to change a lot of my behaviors that I was having. And so as a result of that, I did end up losing a lot of people, more people than I really thought I ever would. And so as a result of that, I was really lonely for a really long time. And so in that process, I kind of had no choice but to face that fear that I had. And I guess my fear that I did have kind of became true in a way. At the same time, now looking back, I'm so grateful that I went through that, because eventually, in that process, having to face that loneliness, I did become more and more comfortable with being alone and more comfortable with my own presence. And so by the end of it, I could never even imagine going back to those kind of environments with the fear of being alone, because being alone had become so blissful and so peaceful to me. At the end of it, I thought, okay, this was really not easy because the loss was just so big and the loneliness so big. But I also thought, regardless of how hard it was, now I would go through it any day again, because the freedom and the happiness that I got from letting go of these environments that were so harmful to me was worth any loneliness I ever had to go through. And even though in those moments I could not see it, now looking back, it becomes very clear to me. Loneliness is scary and not fun, that's for sure. But I think in life, we also have to accept loneliness as part of the journey and to face that fear and to even embrace it in a way, not because that's fun, but because if we don't do that, we will continue to live in fear of loneliness, and that will keep us with people and in environments that are not good for us, because that is still easier than facing that fear of being alone. But when we do face that fear and we make peace with loneliness, then eventually we will become so comfortable with loneliness and with our own presence, really, that from there, anyone we choose to interact with or spend time with, it's because those people are bringing joy or happiness or some kind of positivity or balance into our lives, and not because they are saving us from our own loneliness at the cost of our own sanity. Also, from my experience, I think often for this scenario to happen, where we stay in these harmful environments because of the fear of being alone, for that to actually happen, the fear of being alone has to be pretty big. Otherwise, because the fear has to be bigger than the suffering that we are going through or the unhappiness that we are going through in those environments. And I think whenever fear is that big, it can often make us not think straight anymore. And we start to think, okay, if I do leave or stand up for myself or walk away or lose this person or that person, I will just be thrown into this endless pit of loneliness and I will just be alone for the rest of my life. And even though that's obviously not the case, the mind starts to tell you the story because the mind wants to protect you from that fear of being alone, even though, of course, that is not rooted in reality. And yes, losing people sucks and letting go sucks. And as I said, loneliness can be scary. But I think in those kind of scenarios, it's also really important to bring back some rational thinking and to do some fact checks, because otherwise the mind will really just take you elsewhere. Currently, we have almost 8 billion people on this planet, meaning there is absolutely no need to stay in any environment or with any person who is not good for you, because you are scared that if you walk away, you will never find a friendship or a relationship or whatever it is like that ever again, and you will just be alone for the rest of your life, because the chances of that actually happening with 8 billion people are pretty low. Yes, letting go is never easy, especially if the environments are toxic. But whenever we do let go of people or a person who is not good for us, in that we are also always making space for new people to come into our lives, even though in that moment you kind of forget that. And again, with 8 billion people on this planet, the chances of those new people matching you better and being better for you than those old people who you are so afraid of losing, chances are pretty high that that's going to happen. And so you don't even need to trust in anything crazy for that to be the case. It's really just simple maths. Stop having relationship problems with people who you are not in a relationship with. I am a firm believer that good, close, solid relationships take work and that there is no shortcut around that. So we have to be willing to invest time and energy and to not just walk away or, walk out whenever things get boring or challenging, and to be making space for arguments or misunderstandings and just to be present and consistent. And I think those choices are not always easy, but then at the same time, the rewards that come from having those kind of solid relationships are it's just something that money can't buy, because you get so much happiness and joy and fun and lightness in return whenever we are willing to invest and be present in that way. Those journeys when we grow with each other and we build something solid are just so valuable. And I think as a personality, I also often crave that more than surface level relationships with a lot of people. But at the same time, with me seeing so much value in those solid relationships, eventually I also had to learn to not throw those expectations on anyone who enters my life. And so to not expect people to show up in the way that one would in a close relationship or close friendship if I am not in such a relationship with that person, and also to not be willing to invest so much of my time and energy in that way if that is not being reciprocated the other way around. Life is made up of so many different kinds of relationships, and they are all valuable in their own way. And so we have those people who are just part of our close inner circle, and we just know that they will be a part of our life for a really long time, or maybe even forever. But then there are also people who don't fall into that category, and that's totally fine. So maybe friends who you don't know super well, or party friends, or just social contacts, or co-workers, or whatever it is. And those relationships and interactions are also really, really valuable, but we can't expect those people to show up in the way that we would in really, really close relationships, because otherwise we will have relationship problems with people who we are not in a relationship with, and that just never works out very well. A while back, I had this situation where I was friends with someone for a fairly short amount of time, but we were never really super, super close, just kind of like friends in a way. And then by the end of it, I just realized that we seemed to not have the same morals and the same values. And so the whole thing just fell through and didn't work out, which is totally fine. But I realized that in that process, while things were falling apart in a way, I was willing to invest and explain myself and resolve the situation in the way that I would if a really, really close friendship of mine would fall apart, even though the other person couldn't really have cared less. I was kind of willing to give that much of myself. And also after things fell through, I realized that I was kind of walking around for a while feeling like I had lost a friend. And then afterwards I was reflecting, why do I feel like I lost a friendship if I was never friends with that person? And why am I willing to sort this out and prioritize this in a way that I would with a really, really close friend if I'm not in a close friendship with this person, and that person is not showing me in any way that they are willing to reciprocate that kind of effort and energy in terms of resolving it? Or then recently I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we had a similar conversation because basically she had gone on a date with this guy, and throughout the date she realized that he was just not very interested in her. He was not very attentive or just present in any way. And so by the end of it, when she came home, she wanted to send him a message explaining that she would not want to see him again. But before she sent that message, she sent it to me, and we just realized that the message that she wanted to send was explaining herself and putting as much thought and effort into explaining what she was feeling in the way that you would if you have dated someone for 6 months or a year, even though she barely even knew the person. Of course, it's important and really good to have a level of respect and decency and kindness that we show up with everyone in life, no matter if we know them well or not. That's just, I think, really a good value to have, but we don't have to overdo it. And so there's no need to send a message and obsess about the situation and overthink it in the way that you would in a relationship if you are not in a relationship with that person. It's really totally enough to just send a short message saying you're no longer interested and whatever, just being nice and kind about it. But short and direct is more than enough. And there's no need for her in that situation to go through that kind of an emotional turmoil because the situation doesn't ask for it. Relationships of all kinds should be balanced, whether that is a friendship, a relationship, a coworker, or anything else. And so there is really no need to go through the sadness or the disappointment or the confusion or the stress that we go through in really close relationships that are balanced with people who we are not in such a relationship with, because in that we are simply giving too much of ourselves in an environment or with people that have not shown us that they are willing to reciprocate that energy and that intention. And that's not always a bad thing. On the contrary, as I said, there is so much value that also comes from relationships with people who we are not super close with, and we can learn and grow so much from those relationships. But it really makes no sense to expect those people to show up in those ways, because in that we will start having relationship problems with people who we are not in a relationship with. And I think that just never really turns out very well. The day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit. I feel a value that we seem to be losing more and more nowadays is the art of patience and even consistency, because especially with social media, we are getting so used to instant results and things happening super fast because we want entertainment and it just happens instantly. We want validation, it happens instantly. We want likes, it happens instantly. But the real world doesn't operate like that. In the real world, values that are really important are things such as patience and consistency, because good things take time, and that's okay. We cannot expect ourselves to make things happen overnight. Things mostly don't happen overnight, but that shouldn't demotivate us from continuing to move forward and knowing that every seed that we do plant will grow into a fruit eventually if we can just have the patience and the consistency to see that come to life. I actually really like this analogy of the seed and then the fruit or the flower or the tree growing from it, because it really visually emphasizes how important the first step of the journey is, even though that first step is often not very visible. And so let's say, for example, you want to start a YouTube channel. And so that is the tree or the flower or the fruit or whatever it is that you want to grow. And so you decide to take the first step and plant the seed, and you sit down, you film a video and you upload it. But let's say maybe because you don't really know how to use the equipment yet and you're still learning, the video is not great, and you upload it and nobody watches it because nobody knows about it yet. And so in that moment, we feel like a failure. Maybe we think, oh my God, how stupid was that? Why did I even do that? But we forget that regardless of who sees it or what someone thinks or how much it presents to the outside, that first step of planting that seed is so important and so valuable, because that's the whole thing that has to happen for the fruit to even grow in the first place. You can't grow a fruit without putting that first seed in. And so even though we don't see those results tomorrow or the day after or instantly, that thing that we are doing carries so much value and importance. Also, I think sometimes we are just too hard on ourselves and we expect ourselves to make things happen overnight. And if we don't manage, we say, well, I don't have it in me to make it happen. But you also don't take a seed and put it in the ground. And then if you wake up the next day and it isn't a tree or a flower or a fruit yet, we say, well, what a shitty seed. It's not worth anything. No, we know that we have to water it consistently and be patient, and we will see that seed and that plant go through different seasons and storms and whatever. But eventually, if we are patient enough and consistent enough, it will grow into that tree or that flower that we want if we just create the space for that to come to life. We all have so much potential within us, but it's really about giving ourselves the patience and the consistency to see that come to life and to see what kind of an amazing flower would I grow into if I don't expect my seed to turn into a flower tomorrow, but if I just continuously water it and nurture it, what kind of potential do I have within me in those circumstances? Having patience in life is not easy, and being consistent is not easy. Those are two things that I often really struggle with. I often expect myself to make things happen overnight, and if I don't manage, I just will tell myself, well, you don't have it in you. You are a loser and you have failed. But that's where I think we have to, especially nowadays, relearn the art of patience and consistency, because I think it's kind of getting lost. And then in that, we will really see what kind of potential we have, because we create an environment where that is possible to come to life in the first place. And I think we would all be thriving much more and seeing much more potential within us if we would be creating those spaces for ourselves. All right, everyone, that is all I wanted to share for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I am very much looking forward to connecting with you in my next episode.